all sorts of people who've challenged him politically in any way. Harriet Harman is obviously on the receiving end of that this week, and I would have thought she must be very, very angry about this kind of thing, because whatever you think about her politics, she clearly is somebody who's got abilities politically, who's got all sorts of experience, and not to involve her in it tells you exactly the direction they're going in. So you've got these boys' clubs,
Lindsay,
really.
Interestingly, Harriet Harman, who has stood up for women's voting rights and all kinds of issues to do with working women, has been absolutely massacred by the British press.
Yes,
day
that's
in,
right.
day out.
But this
years.
is true. This happened to Claire Short when Claire Short campaigned against page 3 of the Sun. She was pilloried. That any woman who stands up with any strong views in this kind of way, they're regarded as somehow kind of harridans who shouldn't behave in this way, and it makes it much, much harder. You've got to have a very thick skin to do it.
OK, and let's have another question.
Everyone I know is voting for Lib Dem. Why would I vote for other parties?
I want to know what the politicians are going to do to increase the world majority people's chances of going to university, leaving with a degree and getting employed afterwards.
Yes, these are questions which people really, these questions that the young people are asking are the crucial questions. We've got kids now facing recession, facing the worst unemployment we've seen for years. There are massive cuts coming in the education system, particularly that'll be very, very bad in higher education. They're already being sort of forced through in bigger and bigger classes all the time, both at school and at university. And these are the questions that, in my opinion, none of the main parties are really answering.
And yet Labour says it is addressing these problems, trying to get more women into university, which has been successful. A majority of students in universities by quite a long chalk are women now. So a success.
That is a success. It didn't just start with the Labour government, to tell the truth. It started over the last 20 or 30 years. So now there are more women, and it's part of women having to be more highly educated in order to compete on the job market, which is basically a very good thing for women. But Labour isn't really doing a great deal to help these people, and all of the policies are, we're going to find out after the election that there are going to be massive cuts, there'll be tax rises for people, because they haven't come clean about the amount of money that there is a deficit for.
OK, it's time for our next caller. Welcome to Vote Who?
Yes, hello, it's Natalie here.
Hi Natalie, what's your question?
Yes, well, Bolivia is the first country in the world to have a cabinet with the same number of men as women in the executive government. Would you say Bolivia is leading the way when it's come to including women in politics?
OK, Lindsay, over to you. Bolivia leading the way.
Well, I think it's a very good sign, but having equal numbers of men and women in Parliament isn't the only question. For example, in Afghanistan, a quarter of the seats in Parliament are reserved for women. But we all know that women's position in that country is very, very difficult in many situations to do with education and culture and all those other kind of things. So it's very, very good that Bolivia is doing this, and I think we should all welcome that. But it's also about what kind of policies they introduce which will help particularly the poorer women in society.
But I think the point is that we're a wealthier nation. You know, we've got the luxury of talking about a public health service, and yet we can't get an equal number of women into our parliament or even being represented for election at all. What's wrong with that picture? Well,
even more so when you think that Britain was one of the countries that imposed this quota on Afghanistan, but we haven't got a quarter of the women in the British Parliament. And it does tell you about women. There is a structural inequality in British society and in most societies where women are expected to do the worst paid jobs, do earn less money than men, are expected to do most of the childcare. And this is something that governments have not addressed. They do not provide free childcare, for example.
OK, we're going to go for another caller. Welcome to Vote Who. What's your question?
Hello.
Hi, it's Lauren here on Vote Who. Welcome. What's your question for Lindsay, please? I
would like to know her opinion with regards to the party's stance with their wives. At the moment, I've been seeing a lot more of David Cameron's wife, Gordon Brown's wife, and even Nick Clegg's wife has been in the papers recently. I was wondering whether there's a concerted effort by the parties to get their wives into the forefront of these elections. Can I
ask you, what do you think about the leaders' wives being paraded ahead of actual female MPs?
Well, I mean, the last elections, I cannot remember this kind of exposure. I think there seems to be some sort of concerted effort to show that these are family men and the women are very much part of their decision-making process.
It seems also, would you say that perhaps the big questions like Afghanistan, the continuing problems in Iraq are being avoided by these kind of staged, managed visits by the wives, perhaps?
Definitely. I don't think I've heard much on Afghanistan or Iraq or on other issues. I think there's a lot of talk, especially in the media, with regards to the politicians' wives.
OK, thanks very much. Well, we'll throw that over to Lindsay now. Again, politicians' wives, voters annoyed.
Well, I agree absolutely with what the caller is saying, that this is part of the trivialisation of politics, where we're expected to care about what they look like, what they're wearing, what they think about their husbands. Now, this may be of a bit of interest, but it's not really what an election should be about. And it does make you feel that all the main parties are really trying to say, don't deal with the big issues, don't talk about the war, don't talk about the real state of the economy, don't talk about what's happening in Greece, which may be coming here quite
Lindsay,
soon.
what about Nick Clegg, who's a member of the smaller party, the Lib Dems, rising in the polls now? His wife said, I'm a professional woman, I'm not going to go out, and was really pretty much humiliated in the press for that.
Yes, well, this is the press really should be ashamed of themselves. Yeah. This is clearly a woman who has her own career, her own interests, who no doubt supports her husband standing for election, but doesn't want to spend all her time doing it. Why should she? Why, just because you're married to somebody,
let's be honest
why should
here,
you?
If I was an editor of a newspaper, I'd say it's supply and demand. People actually want to see these women and find that they give a gloss to the election. Is that the society we live in? I
don't really believe that's true. Do you think with Margaret Thatcher anybody particularly wanted to see her husband? Do you? I mean, it really isn't what people are concerned about. But what the media in particular does is to say this is what people should be interested about. It's all about celebrity. It's all about superficial things. It's all about how people look. Even with Nick Clegg, actually, I think why people are becoming more keen on the Lib Dems is because actually a number of their policies, I think, in my opinion, are better than ones that, you know, for example, over Iraq, for example, over immigration.
Possibly their spin machine has allowed the actual ethics of the party to come through. That's an interesting point. It's time now for our next question.
I'd like to know what basically is going to happen to involve women in politics in general, and also what about the involvement of African women and the issue of racism as well.
Well, that question of racism is, of course, a huge question in mainstream politics. There are the first British MPs, or certainly the first British MPs for more than 50 years, who were black and Asian, only got elected in 1987. It's estimated that even if the number of people who are expected to get elected do get elected, there will only be 20, 25 black and Asian MPs.
Which is what percentage of the makeup of the average party?
Well, that's, if you look at the percentage of the makeup of the average party, I mean, there's 660 seats. So you're talking about a tiny, tiny number of, you're talking about, what, less than 0.5% of MPs will be black and Asian.
But if the major parties can't, well, if the Conservative Party certainly can't stomach all women lists, all minority women lists are just never going to happen in this country.
Well, but they have to if we're going to change the face of politics. And the point that was made about African women in particular, but Afro-Caribbean, Asian women, women from the Middle East, all these people who actually are very interested in politics, are very involved in politics, again, in the anti-war movement and no doubt in many other campaigns. They're also very heavily unionised. If you look at black people in particular and black women in areas like the NHS, they join unions. It's not they're not interested in politics, but there's no outcome for them, and there needs to be a completely different approach to politics than the one that we have at the moment.
OK. We now have Tyron on the line. Welcome to Vote Who. Can I have your question, please?
Good evening, ladies. I just wanted to say you're doing a fantastic job. What I wanted to say is, in the Tories manifesto, the big thing is women and gender equality. Does that mean I should vote for Tories if that's a priority for me?
I'm not sure what the question was there. You started off talking about priorities in the Conservative Party.
Let me say again. In the Tories manifesto, one of the big